Have you ever thought that a man, just a prisoner, a stranger among billions, could become the reason an empire chooses peace instead of war? This did not begin with love, not with a fateful collision, not with a glance across enemy lines. It began with doubt, with cold, and with a room that had no windows. Elias Ward was captured during a negotiation mission that never had a chance. His ship, a civilian diplomatic vessel, was intercepted in neutral space by the Solarian fleet. No warning, no dialogue, just one order: take him alive. They did not torture him, did not lock him in darkness, did not wipe his memories. They simply kept him and waited. On the second day she entered, Sereth, Chief Diplomatic Officer of Sereth. She had negotiated 37 treaties and ended 5 wars with a voice cold as glass. She did not smile, she did not sit, she did not introduce herself. You are Elias Ward. It was not a question, it was a sentence. Elias looked up and nodded slightly. He did not react the way she expected. No pleading, no shouting, no defiance. He sat like a man who no longer needed to prove anything. Sereth asked her first question, something about Earth's defense strategy. Elias answered, "I don't know." She rephrased, provided simulations. Same answer, "I don't know." She frowned. She had seen liars, clever manipulators, even the brave. But not like him, no rage, no resistance, only presence. Calm, unadorned, almost human. "You're not afraid of me?" she asked. "What would fear accomplish?" he said, eyes never leaving hers. Sereth turned away. She had watched many break, but this was the first man who didn't try to survive. She left the room. No image was saved, no data was extracted. But that night, in her private quarters, she watched the footage again. She played it back. Not for analysis, but just to see his face one more time. And when she shut the screen for the first time in years, sleep came to her. Not from a neural stabilizer, but from something else. Something unfamiliar. A thought without a name. If he is not trying to live, why do I want to keep him alive so badly? On the third day, Sereth returned to the interrogation room. Not because of new orders, not because Elias had suddenly become cooperative, but because she wanted to observe him again. As an analyst, she told herself. Elias sat in the same chair. His hands were not bound, but they never left the table. He was doing something simple, flipping a charred piece of paper between his fingers, something the security team had overlooked since it held no military value. Sereth sat down for the first time. She didn't know why, but the movement felt natural, like it bypassed the decision tree she had been trained to follow. "What is that paper?" she asked. Elias looked up. His voice was calm, as if they were speaking in some quiet earthside cafe on a winter afternoon. A photo, family, burned when the ship was hit. Only part of it left, but enough for me to recognize my mother. Sereth didn't know why her heartbeat skipped at that sentence. She had been trained on human family bonds, labeled as irrational, distracting from duty. But when Elias placed the fragment on the table and slid it toward her, she picked it up. The image was faint. A face blurred, dark eyes, an unclear smile. No tactical data, no identification code. But she could not look away. "You have nothing to hide?" she asked. "I do. But not from you," Elias said. "You're not trying to break me. You're trying to understand me, and I don't think anyone can understand a civilization if they hide everything." She stayed silent. "Have you ever seen an Earth sunset?" he asked. "Number Solaris doesn't have a single star orbit. That's a shame. You'd like it. There's a moment, just a few seconds, when the sky shifts between red and blue. It's the most peaceful time I've ever felt." Sereth looked at him as if decoding a language without logic. His answers served no extractive goal, and yet she didn't want the conversation to end. There was a long pause, not tactical, not threatening, just stillness, between two people who had existed at opposite ends of a story. Now, something new was beginning to flow. Elias reached into his pocket and placed a small object on the table. A rectangular device, old, music player, almost dead battery, but I've kept one song. He pressed a button. A sound emerged, faint, crackling, but clear. A woman's voice, humming a simple melody, no lyrics. My mother used to sing this when I was little. Helped me sleep, helped me stay calm. Sereth didn't speak. She didn't close her eyes, but her finger touched the edge of the table, where the tiny vibrations spread outward, as if even that faint wave could soothe the silence of an entire space station. I think, Elias said, if two civilizations can't understand each other's music, they're not ready to talk about peace. Sereth looked up, and for the first time, her eyes were not just instruments of analysis. There was something else, a movement, a fracture, small, in the ice she had once believed eternal. When the session ended, Sereth left the room without copying the data, without submitting a report. But the melody stayed with her. It looped in her mind as she lay down, not in memory, but in something deeper. She didn't know it yet, but that first vibration would later be called something no military handbook had ever taught her: connection. She did not know why she kept watching the footage, not once, not twice, 5 times, in a single night. Sereth sat in her private command booth, where every system was built for analysis. But tonight she used none of them. No fast-forwarding, no speech tagging, just play and silence. She watched Elias talk about his mother, not because his words were elegant, not because they held any valuable intel, but because in one moment his eyes drifted away, and she saw herself in that look. A feeling without a name, not pain, not joy, just movement. She ran a diagnostic on her own vitals. Minor heart rate variation. A surge in neurotransmitter activity, statistically abnormal. Inner ear sensors reacting to low-frequency sound. Specifically, music. Conclusion? None. There was no biological definition for why a Solarian war strategist would spend an entire night replaying a fragment of human melody. She tried cutting off contact. 12 hours without any signal from the detention chamber. In those 12 hours she did not dream, but she could not sleep. She played the recording again, this time letting the melody hum quietly in the background as she worked. Just to measure the effect, she told herself. That evening she entered the holding cell unannounced. Elias was lying down, eyes on the ceiling, fingers still holding that half-burned photo. "I don't usually get visitors after lights out," he said. A sleepy voice, no sarcasm. Sereth didn't move, no step forward, no retreat. She simply asked, "Have you ever dreamed of living in a world without war?" Elias propped himself up on an elbow, nodded slowly. "When I was a kid, I used to dream about planting tomatoes in a backyard. Sometimes I think all I ever wanted was to go back to that dream." Sereth nodded. She didn't smile, but in her eyes, for the first time, was a kind of listening that served no mission. "They taught us emotions are a burden," she said, "that they make strategy fail." "Maybe they're right," Elias said, "but I think the things that make us vulnerable are the same things that make us worth saving." She did not answer, but she also did not leave. They sat in the dim light. No judgment, no interrogation. Just two living beings, pushed to the farthest edge of the systems they believed in, and discovering, at the edge, someone else was already sitting there. The next day, Sereth filed no report. She activated no analysis. Instead, she replayed the story Elias told. About the afternoon his mother took him for a walk after the first war bulletin aired on public networks. He hadn't cried, but she, someone who had never known the concept of tears, felt her throat close. Not because of data, not because of duty, but because she was starting to understand. The way he looked up at that blank white ceiling, it wasn't meaningless. He was looking at an old sky, one she had never flown through. But for the first time she wanted to. For the first time in her life, Sereth dreamed. She did not know where the dream began. Maybe it was the melody, that human song she had replayed too many times. Maybe it was the silent way Elias looked at her when they spoke, without rank, without orders, or maybe it came from the one thing she no longer wanted to deny, emotion. In the dream she wore no armor. Elias was not bound. They stood side by side on unnamed ground, a place with no tactical map, no cold, no comm station, no enemy, only one thing, stillness, so unfamiliar that she did not want to leave it. When she woke, the dream lingered, like fine dust settling across her hands. She could not brush it off. That morning, she filed no report. She opened no star charts. She simply sat beside the darkened screen at her console and touched it, lightly, as if trying to find an echo from a place without sound. That night, she went to the detention chamber unplanned. No recording, no lights. Elias sat up as her shadow appeared in the doorway. He didn't ask why she came, and for once, he didn't joke. She stood still, then stepped inside. Every step, like pressing into something she once refused to feel. She sat across from him, for the first time in a space that was no longer called interrogation. "If I were the last one of my kind," she asked, voice low as breath, "would you keep me?" The question arrived like a broken fragment tossed into a perfect machine. Elias didn't smile, didn't respond right away. He looked at her as if time had just paused. For one beat. "Do you believe I would tell the truth?" he asked. "If I didn't, I wouldn't have asked." Elias tilted his head, looked at the ceiling like always, but this time the gaze did not wander. It landed right where she sat. "I don't keep someone because they're about to vanish. I keep them because I don't want them to." The answer was simple, no philosophy, no strategy. But in her chest, Sereth felt a rhythm unfamiliar, not logged in her physiological training. "And if you were the last?" she asked. She wasn't sure if it came from curiosity or fear. Elias replied so softly she had to lean in to hear. "I think I stopped being the last one the moment you asked that question. They didn't touch. They didn't move closer. But something in the space between them had been removed. A layer of armor, a border, a system that no longer applied. That night, no data was saved. But in the deepest archive, where no satellite could scan, a new entry appeared in Sereth's mind. It had no strategic value, no code, no designation, only a feeling. That if she lost this, nothing else in her life would ever hold its shape again. The message arrived at 2:17 Solarian Standard Time. No image, no voice, just a string of top clearance code, clean, director, precise. The Central Council Command has formally authorized Operation Purge. All Earth-adjacent space will be locked down. Preemptive strikes to begin within 72 hours. All intelligence units must return for reassignment. All assets are subject to Rule 9, Rule 9. Sereth didn't need to look it up. It meant eliminate the subject if considered an obstacle or no longer of use. Elias. She stood in front of the blackened screen inside her private chamber. Her hand did not shake. Her voice did not change. But something inside her chest had fallen out of formation. She shut the terminal off, stepped into the corridor. Her boots hit the floor in measured rhythm, but every step was a silent argument between duty and something that had started calling her by name, not rank. When she entered the holding cell, Elias was folding scraps of paper into strange shapes. He didn't look up when the door opened, as if he already knew who it was and why. "News?" he asked, still focused on his folded shape. "Yes," she said, shorter than usual. "So, I'm being processed." She didn't answer. Elias looked up, met her eyes. "I guess I'm not worth keeping around, that's not it." "No?" He gave a dry, tired laugh. "Then why do you look like someone just handed you the order to burn down a planet?" She didn't flinch, didn't get angry. Instead, she sat across from him. For the first time, not to monitor, not to command, not to control, I received withdrawal orders and a directive to escort you back. For what? It didn't say, but you know, I know. The room went quiet, as if it had never existed. Elias leaned back against the wall, looked at her, then nodded slowly. "So, this is the end? Number. You'll take me in? I have to, but you don't want to." She didn't answer, because this time no answer felt right. At last she spoke, softly. "If I do this, I'm no longer myself." Elias closed his eyes, not in surrender, but because he had sensed this moment the second she entered without a data slate or questions. He opened them again, looked directly at her. "Then don't." She said nothing, but the next morning, when Sereth's ship left the neutral orbital station, Elias was not cuffed, not guarded, not woken by order. She sat across from him, both hands resting on her knees, her eyes not meeting his, but never drifting far, and between them, no chains, no orders, only one truth, more solid than any command. They had gone too far to turn back, and for the first time in Sereth's life, an attack order was no longer unquestionable. The ship drifted silently through the edge of neutral space, a region beyond the reach of both suns' light. No more scans, no more messages from command, only silence, and time to think, if one had the courage to face themselves. Elias stood at the observation window, his eyes fixed on the distant clouds of stardust. He did not ask what she planned to do, and she did not issue orders. Sereth sat alone in the navigation bay. Before her, the console glowed with automated prompts, reminders of mission, route, protocol, and an ethics system written in code. She had piloted hundreds of ships by those codes. But today, her hands did not move. She simply watched and thought. Elias entered. No permission. No reason needed. They had moved past the need for ceremony. "You're planning to turn me in?" She didn't turn around. "I don't know anymore. I thought you always knew." "So did I." He stood in silence, then stepped beside her. "You could take me back, get your medal, return to your place. Forget all this. I can't. Because of me? Not just you." She turned, met his eyes. "Because of me." For the first time, her words carried no weight of command, only recognition. Something had been living inside her for days now. No name, no form, but undeniable. Elias said nothing more. He simply nodded, as if standing before a doorway no one could see through, but willing to walk through it with her. Sereth activated the console, but not to plot a course back to Central Command. She set the coordinates off route, toward a neutral planet claimed by no one. No armies, no politics, only quiet. The ship's security system issued a warning. Lights turned amber. She did not cancel the command. "What are you doing?" Elias asked. "Something not on the plan." The ship accelerated, then steadied. Elias looked at her, the quiet light across her face reflecting in his eyes. "Are you afraid? I used to think I didn't know fear." Then I met you, and now I'm afraid that if I let them kill you, I won't be me anymore. I'll be what they built instead. The ship entered a signal dead zone, no tracking, no pursuit. They had left the grid, left the roles, left the war. Between them, there were no declarations, no kiss. But there was something clearer than any treaty ever written. For the first time in her life, Sereth did not follow an order. She made a choice. They were not hiding. They were not running. Sereth's ship hovered in the space between two hostile planets. A place once labeled a dead zone. Too close to crossfire, too far from reinforcement. But today, the ship remained still, silent, as if space itself had stopped to breathe. Elias sat in the auxiliary navigation chamber, eyes fixed on the signal board. He knew. Even in their silence, the Central Council had begun tracing coordinates. And if they did not act soon, this quiet would not last. "They will find us," Elias said. "I know. They will want to know why you disobeyed. I will answer." He looked at her. Serious. Not out of fear, but because he understood. What she was about to say was no longer meant for him. It was meant for the world. Sereth opened a secured transmission channel. Top-tier emergency access. Anyone with council clearance would receive it, and they would listen. The screen lit up, no visuals, only sound. But this time, Sereth did not speak first. She played a recording. No strategic data, no map, no cipher, just a voice, Elias's voice, low, rough, unpolished, singing an old lullaby. The words were unclear, but the soul was not. A sad melody, gentle, bare, like a heart with no armor left. When the song ended, Sereth looked into the comm lens. For the first time, not as a representative of any empire. "This is the prisoner I was ordered to extract." He gave no strategies, no secrets. But he gave me something we never thought we needed to understand. A reason to stop. I do not ask for forgiveness. I do not ask to be accepted. I only ask that you hear this, and ask yourselves, if we cannot feel a song like this, are we still a species that knows how to live? I chose to keep him alive, not out of emotion, but reason. Because I believe if anything can make an empire stop a war, it will not be a weapon, it will be this. She pressed send, no confirmation, no reply, only a very long silence. Elias came to stand beside her. Softly, he asked, "Do you think they'll listen?" "I don't know," she said. "But at least they can't say they never heard it." Sereth was not arrested, but she was not forgiven either. When the ship returned, there was no strike team waiting, no formal sentence, but also no welcome. She was stripped of command, exiled from the central ranks, no access to strategic data, no place at the council. Elias returned to Earth in silence, not as a hero, not as a prisoner, just as someone who survived, carrying memories of a journey that existed on no map. And then, a few weeks later, something happened no one expected. During an emergency summit, tensions stretched thin after 32 hours of deadlock. An assistant, a name no one remembered, suddenly played back an old transmission. Not a tactical report, not interrogation data, just a lullaby. The sound filled the chamber, rough, slow, unpolished, a melody no one could explain and no one dared to interrupt. For 3 minutes, no one spoke. When the song ended, the assistant shut off the device and a Solarian delegate stood, spoke only one line. "I don't know if this is the right reason to sign a treaty, but if we once killed each other out of misunderstanding, maybe this time we try living for something we do not yet understand." A hand was raised, no applause, just a pen, set down, signing first. Peace did not begin with a treaty. It began with an old song, a long silence, and two people from opposite sides who dared to admit one thing, that the weakest thing, sometimes, is the strongest force holding everything together. On a distant space station, Elias reopened the old playback device. He sat beside Sereth. No more pursuit, no more questioning. She said nothing. But when the song played again, her hand rested gently over his, like a period at the end of a sentence that needed no words. And if you're still listening, tell me, what do you think truly makes a civilization worth keeping? Is it the technology, the weapons, or the ability to feel a lullaby with something language has not yet learned how to name? Leave your thoughts, not for me, but for the world you want to see next.